Hello, I'm Dr. Nidhi Gupta, pediatric endocrinologist and digital wellness coach in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome to Inspinar. This morning, I received an email from a healthcare professional in New York. The email said, Dr. Gupta, could you please share some articles that you have written about digital wellness? My children's screen addiction is at its worst. Given that I am a healthcare professional glued to my own screens all the time, I don't even know where to start. I thought, well, the timing of this email could not have been more perfect given our guest on Inspinar today. Emily, welcome to Inspinar.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Emily, what does it mean to be tech intentional?
I love that. To me, it means using technology in a way that aligns with our values for ourselves and our children as well, of course, and that enhances, nurtures, and supports our family, ourselves, and our children, and avoiding, limiting, delaying, or resisting any screen use that interferes with healthy development. Now, that's a big mouthful. So, my TLDR is later is better, less is more, relationships first. That's it.
Later is better, less is more, relationships first. I
Yes.
love it. So, Emily,
Thank you.
of course, how do we help families and ourselves become more tech intentional?
Yeah, this is a question I am sure you also get all the time. It's how do we do this? And one of the things I always like to start with is this idea of replacing judgment with curiosity, because I always joke that parenting is the judgiest sport I've ever played. And screen time is even more judgy, like opinions about how you do it. Are you doing it right? Are you doing it wrong? Are you ruining your children? So the first thing is to just take a deep breath and start with curiosity and know that this is a question we get all the time. You are not alone in your struggle around parenting in the digital age, and that even small incremental change, no matter how old your children are, matters. Because it's a very different conversation, as you know, like we're talking to parents of children who are 5 or 6 versus 15 or 16. And so any point in your parenting journey, you can become tech intentional. And so I invite parents to not give up. It is still worth learning and making small changes because it's what's best for everybody.
Learning and making small changes, letting go of the judgment when it comes to parenting in general, but specifically when it comes to how do you manage screen time for your kids.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, do you recommend parental controls? I often hear parents, or I often encounter experiences from parents of teenagers who feel reassured that they have introduced a smartphone to their child, but the smartphone has parental controls and that they are monitoring or able to monitor as needed their child's activities in the online world. Would you recommend parental controls? Are there pros and cons? Are they as reliable as we think they are?
I get this question a lot as well. And the short answer is I don't recommend them. But here's the caveat: for some families, they're a great tool. But what I often find is that when parents are seeking them out, it is often very far along in the process, right? Like you say, teenagers. And they want it to be the solution, the magic solution that will fix the problem. And it doesn't, and it won't. Because at that point, and in that stage of development, you cannot just block, limit, lock it down. First of all, it doesn't work. Kids are way savvier than we are. I hear all the time about kids finding the workaround. The other piece of it that's so important to me is the monitoring doesn't exempt us from the mentoring. And we cannot just check this box, download an app, and think it will be okay, when in fact that's not going to be the solution. We have to be a part of that conversation with our children. So, you know, I'm not a hard no in the sense that there are some families that might use it as an additional tool, but it will not make the screen time arguments go away. It will just change them. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. I think there are some other questions that are more useful to ask when it comes to screen time. I usually get how much is too much and what parental controls do you recommend? What I usually steer parents to think about, and there's research to back this up, is the better questions to ask are actually, do I know what my child is doing online if they're online? And do I have a good relationship with my child? Those are sort of the two fundamental must know the answer to those questions that are going to be more effective in protecting mental health, protecting brain development, preserving relationships, than trying to download a bunch of parental controls that are not perfect.
Given the addictive capabilities of the content that is accessible on smart devices, Emily, do you feel our little children, even teenagers or teenagers, are capable of exercising the self-control and the self-discipline to be able to resist that potential addiction?
Short answer, no, because of brains. They're just different than adults. And I think this is where we run into some real issues by expecting that children can self-regulate, self-manage. Of course, there are a few very mature children who probably have no problem. They can just turn it off when they want. They're very good at modulating their mood. That is the exception, not the rule. And what I always tell parents is, look, our prefrontal cortex, as you well know, isn't fully developed till we're well into our 20s, maybe even 30s. And that's the part of the brain where all of this important regulation happens, like, not just time management and planning, but emotion regulation and cognitive flexibility and thinking longer term, impulse control, all of that stuff that comes down to those fights about screen time. That brain part isn't there. It's still building itself. And so we cannot, I always give the example of, like, how many of us as parents are doom scrolling on Twitter at night, or just auto playing next episode after next episode. We're adults with fully formed brains, and we have a problem with it. There is no way we can expect children to do it. So to that point, parents definitely have to be a part of that solution. It cannot be relying on a child to do it. I hear that a lot. Oh, my kid can self-regulate. Maybe 1 in a million. I don't know what the data is on that, but it's not a lot.
Maybe 1 in a million kid can self-regulate their behavior when it comes to accessing or not accessing content online. If we have established that fact without a doubt that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until at least mid-20s, as parents, as a community, how come we have ended up in a place where we have made childhood so complicated, where we are even having this discussion? What purpose as parents, are we imagining is being solved by giving our children access to technology that they cannot manage?
Great question. I think there's many, many reasons. I see sort of two big ones. One is the sort of collective peer pressure. Everyone else is doing it. And if I don't, my child's left out, which is true. But I also say, think about when they get social media, for example, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, is way worse once they get it. So it's a reality of childhood to not always feel included. That doesn't mean it feels good, but it is a normal part of childhood. And we have to help teach our children to process and experience that. The second problem is, I think there is the screen use that is coming in through school. And so it's very confusing. It used to be that parents were worried about the screen time after school. Oh, my kid comes home and watches TV. The good old days of TV, right? It's not the same at all. And now it's, how many hours a day is my kid spending on a laptop or iPad at school, and then coming home and spending hours? And so it becomes, that is a huge problem. I guess there's another one, which is there's a lot of parental guilt and shame around the fact that we ourselves have struggled with managing screens, even though we came to them later in life. And so there's some feeling of, am I being a hypocrite by saying no to my kid while I do it? And I'm going to say, yeah, to some degree, that's true. But that doesn't mean your rules have to be the same for your kids, because you are the adult. but you have to be clear about it. And I think kids will hook into that hypocrisy and use it against you. And so that's never an effective way to go into the screen time parenting challenge. But I think that's a big challenge to this as well.
One of the other arguments that I often hear is for safety reasons. Parents feel that my child is safer with a smartphone or smartwatch. How do you address that
Yes.
concern, Emily?
Yes, that's another one. I forgot that one. That's like, it's one of my top three too. So, yes. So this is a really interesting challenge because I hear this as well. My kid needs a phone to be safe. Pew Research recently found that the top three parental fears in America are, in this order, youth mental health, bullying, and kidnapping. Now, when I hear parents say, I'm giving a phone to keep my child safe, it's almost always related to kidnapping. I want to make sure that if something happens, they can reach me. Or it might be that they get lost, right? Or they don't know where to go, which that's a different conversation because I'm not sure the phone is the right tool for that anyway. The problem is that kidnapping is statistically incredibly rare. We as adults are consuming news 24/7. In order to hold our attention, they have to give us the most sensational stories. So we do hear about the one off kidnapping thing that does happen that's scary. But statistically, and again, someone did this math and I love it. If you wanted your child to get kidnapped, obviously no one does, but if you did, you would have to leave them outside every day for 750,000 years in order to guarantee they'd be kidnapped. And so to me, I look at that and I go, that's pretty unlikely. And then I want to go back to number one and number two, and bullying. When we give children unlimited access to the internet, when we give them access to social media before their brains are fully developed or they're emotionally ready, what do? We make number one and number two way worse. So I talk about this as a dichotomy between what is scary versus what is dangerous. And to me, kidnapping is scary, but it's not actually a danger that our children face in the world today. Youth mental health crisis, very dangerous, very real. Surgeon General put a warning out about it last year. And bullying, what is a better tool on which to bully or be bullied than a device where you can hide your face and your name, right? So to me, that is a huge concern, is that we're picking the scary in our decision making and we need to be focusing on the dangerous.
We are picking the scary in our decision making. We need to be focusing on the dangerous. And I completely agree with you, Emily, when you said that our own fear, our own anxieties from the junk, the misinformation, the overinformation that we are consuming on a daily basis, we are projecting our anxieties on our children and giving them the devices in the hopes that it will satisfy or relieve our anxiety. But in fact, the opposite happens.
Exactly.
So, what are some strategies, Emily, that parents can use on a day-to-day basis to relieve these anxieties? What are some alternatives to a smartphone or a smartwatch that they can empower their kids with so that the kids can stay safe as far as dangerous things are concerned, but also stay safe as far as those safety reasons are concerned?
Right. Well, first of all, as part of my philosophy, later is better, right? So the longer you can delay, the better. I am not a fool. And I realize that even if you delay, your child still might be using a friend's phone. They might be accessing stuff that you've forbidden in your home, right? Like it's not ever going to be clean and neat and tidy just because you have the rule. So I absolutely am a fan of the old school flip phone. I want to make a hashtag bring back flip phones, make flip phones cool again. There is a trend in that direction. There are, like the sales of flip phones are kind of going up a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. There are some sort of quote unquote child friendly products on the market that I don't endorse or recommend for a variety of reasons. I think an old school flip phone serves the purpose without all the bells and whistles. I just don't fundamentally accept that a child needs a phone or a watch, right? I think that's kind of the premise where I sort of say, I don't think it's needed. Now, maybe around middle school for a communication device, then we can go to the old school flip phone. There's also something called a light phone, which is a minimalist phone that actually my 13-year-old uses as her device. And, to be clear, as a screen time consultant, my children have screen time. I don't want to come into this thinking, I'm pure and nothing ever conflict wise happens in our house. That's not true at all. And My 16-year-old likes video games, and he does have his own phone, and we talk a lot about it pretty much every day. And then my daughter wanted a phone, and this was the solution, with the light phone. But before, we shared my phone. So actually, she uses my phone number to text her friends from my iPad, or our family iPad, I should say. And so that she feels a little independence, but I see everything. We have lots of conversations about it. And part of it is, if I were a dentist, we'd eat less sugar, is probably the reality. I'm the screen time consultant, so we talk about screen time in my house. So I don't know if I answered your question. I went off on a tangent.
I really wish the trend of bringing flip phones back
Yes,
would
that
pick up more speed in the
I
next
think
few
it is.
years for the sake of our children and for us as
I
well,
agree.
our sanity.
I agree. I agree. And I've toyed with it myself. In fact, it's kind of funny. For a while, I tested the light phone just to see what it was like. And immediately, and I think this is so indicative of the anxiety in our culture, is like my mom sent a group text to my sisters and me, and it came back as some weird message because it was going through the light phone. And she called me and was like, "Oh my gosh, something's wrong with your phone. You've been hacked." I mean, she panicked. And part of it was like, well, that's exactly the problem, right? That you went from 0 to 60 about something that was merely just a change on my part. And like, that was frustrating. I think they're better about group texting now too. That was one an early challenge. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a culture change, right? We've changed the culture really quickly to normalize having smartphones, especially even for children. But I think the pendulum is swinging the other way. I think in 10 years, we're going to look back and be like, can you believe we gave 8-year-olds TikTok on smartphones at school? Like, I I have to hope.
What is very interesting is that this entire cultural change happened very quickly in the last 10 years. Even though it
Yes.
happened only in the last 10 years, it is literally impossible for our generation to imagine that we can go back just 10 years ago, just how life
I
was 10
know.
years ago. We're not going back
I
50
know.
years, just 10 years.
No, exactly. I know, even the good old early days of the internet, where it was a relatively friendly and informative place, and now it's like you flood the zone, right? And somebody, there's a great quote that's like, trying to get information from the internet is trying to take a drink of water from a fire hose. It's just, there's no way. I mean, it's so inundating with things. So I agree. And I think the pandemic made it more complex as an issue, but it was a problem before. And I think that's an important thing, that we can't just blame COVID for these issues. They were absolutely happening prior. It just added fuel to the fire.
I think it added a lot of fuel to the fire, especially in the context of moving a lot of education to
Yes.
tech-based education. So, Emily, what do you think we can do or should do about technology use for school purposes? Or has that train departed and we are now stuck with
I,
it?
well, I'm an optimist, and I think the train is definitely departing. I don't think it's a train we want riding on the tracks, to use the metaphor. I think it is something parents aren't really fully aware of what's happening. Um, I go back to my definition of being tech intentional. Later is better, less is more. Relationships first is true for ed tech and technology in schools as well. I'm also clarify that I'm not anti-tech. I do believe there are ways in which we can use it as a tool in the classroom. When I was a teacher myself, we had a laptop. I taught seventh grade English. We had a laptop cart that we would check out when we were ready to do, type up final drafts of our writing assignments. That was a very appropriate use of the school technology. But I do not think that giving, kindergartners iPads to learn reading is necessary. It's absolutely unnecessary. And in fact, I would call it potentially harmful or detrimental to the brain development, learning, relationships, all of that. I've spoken with several OTs who talk about how, 10 years ago, helping children with handwriting and fine motor. Now they're teaching children how to turn pages of a book, that children have not developed that incredibly, what we think is just, we take that for granted, that that's the skill we all have, but it has to be taught. And that worries me. That is something I think parents have got to say, wait a minute, what's happening? And is this actually what's best for development and learning and relationships? Because I would get rid of all of the computers in school if it meant that my kid had a good relationship with their teacher. That's way more important.
Parents need to be more intentional, more mindful, and more okay with the fact that some children in classroom might learn better from the good old-fashioned book and paper and pencil instead of laptops.
Exactly. And what is mind-boggling to me, and again, I talk about this as a 5 to 10 year problem. It is now considered a rebellious countercultural act to request paper and pencil at school. In fact, my daughter's counselor at school, I was on campus yesterday, said to me, "We are not equipped as a paper-based learning environment. They've spent and invested so much money in the technology that they are not set up for paper and pencil." She's 12. Like, this is mind-boggling to me because we, again, and I know you know this, like the hand-eye coordination, the fine motor, the gross motor, all of the skills that come. We don't go to school to just put knowledge into brains. We go to school to build skills, learn how to socialize, how to interact, how to behave in different environments. Computers and technology are displacing a lot of that.
Computers and technology are displacing a lot of social skills, communication skills, building relationships. And while all of that is happening at school, at an environment outside of home, we don't necessarily have a lot of control over that. We do have control on what happens in the home. So, Emily, how
Right.
can we as parents, how can a family become more tech intentional and move a little bit away, shift a little bit away from thinking that everything tech or screen time related is just for the kids, because clearly it's not.
Exactly. And my favorite tip to give, and this is for adults first, because again, if we're not willing to look at our own use, the kids aren't going to change. But it's called living your life out loud. And so, what I mean by that is narrating what we do as we do it anytime it comes to digital tech. So, I'm reaching for my phone, I'm checking my text messages, I'm going to see what time we have to get you to school. And when your friend's coming over, now I'm texting my husband, I'm going to find out what time he's coming home. I'm looking at the weather, just stream of consciousness narration. And there's so many benefits to this. One, it's the accountability for us, right? If I'm drawing my attention and I'm articulating it out loud, I'm making myself more aware of how I'm using it. But it's also what we're doing for our children when they hear and see us do that. They see, rather than the back of a phone, they're like, oh, that's being used for a lot of different purposes. It's always say it's not a switchblade, it's a Swiss Army knife. It's like multi-tool. And so that's a huge first step, is just describing how we are using it. Then we layer in the emotional component. Like, I'm bored and I'm standing in line at the coffee shop and I'm going to look at Instagram, and looking at Instagram doesn't make me feel better about myself. Now I wish I had a really nice vacation to go on, right? Like, we just start talking about it. And I always tell parents, it's working when your kids start rolling their eyes, because it means they're hearing you. And we have to do this as adults in the house first. And we can help each other. We can be accountability partners, and we can include our kids in it. We can say, hey, I'm trying this new thing. Would you help remind me? Not yell at me, not say, haha, right? Like, remind me, oh, mom, you forgot to live your life out loud. What are you doing? And what you start to realize is that no one's doing it. And it brings us back to 10 years ago when we're like, so rude. They're looking at their phone while they're talking to me. Like, why? So that's the hope, right? Maybe that's the turn back the 10-year clock.
I love it when you said live your life out loud. Imagine how that would go for our teenagers, that if they started living their life out loud and they're reaching for their phone and they're like, I'm just checking this, or I'm just looking at this,
Right.
this. I don't think that will go down very well with them, but it would be fascinating.
And it's worth, again, like I said in the beginning, a little bit of change can make a big difference. And I can even use my 16-year-old as an example. He may not tell me exactly what he's doing, but I've noticed he'll get up, and as he picks up his phone, he says, I'm just going to check, I think I got a text. And then he might be quiet for a few minutes. But that to me is good enough. And I think that's the other message for parents, is we have to be just good enough, not perfect. Perfect's impossible. I always say 80-20, 80% of the time, live your life out loud. 80% of the time, parent within the values you have. You're going to mess up. That's normal. That's also great modeling for kids as well, that we're not perfect either. So that would be my biggest tip, is to live your life out loud.
Live your life out loud 80% of the time. That would be good enough. I love it, Emily. Thank you so
Exactly.
much. Thank you for being
You're
on
so welcome.
Inspinar. It was so educational, and I'm sure our listeners will leave with practical tools that they can implement in their life right away. So thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, let's reconnect with the real world. Let's reconnect with what matters. Let's reclaim our time, attention, and efficiency. Let's ungrip devices and grip life. I will see you next time.